Hello, everyone. Today we're going to step into a story that might feel all too real because it begins with something ordinary, something we've all believed in at some point. Love, trust, and the fragile hope that forgiveness is enough. Right now, imagine me sitting in a quiet living room, the faint hum of a ceiling fan overhead, the smell of coffee drifting from a half-empty mug. The curtains shift slightly as a breeze sneaks through a window I forgot to close. On the surface, everything looks peaceful, calm, almost boring. But what you don't see is the storm inside my chest. The storm that started the day I chose to forgive my husband. I thought forgiveness would save us. I thought it would close the wound and stitch together the life we had carefully built. People tell you that forgiving someone you love is noble, that it gives you strength. And maybe that's true, for a while. But what no one tells you is that sometimes forgiveness blinds you. Sometimes it hides the darker truth waiting quietly in the shadows, ready to strike when you least expect it. That's the place where my story begins. A moment of hope, a fragile decision to let go of one mistake. I wanted to believe my husband when he said it wouldn't happen again. I wanted to believe in the laughter we once shared, the warm mornings we spent drinking coffee together, the future we had whispered about late at night when we were too tired to dream. I wanted to believe, because the alternative was too painful to face. But my friends, this is not a story about hope fulfilled. This is a story about how forgiveness turned into betrayal, how trust became a weapon, and how I discovered a secret so heavy, it broke me in ways I never thought possible. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I'm doing here. Because this isn't just entertainment. This is a journey into the fragile places of the heart. A journey you'll want to follow all the way through. And while you're here, I'd love to know. Comment below where and when you're watching this. Are you curled up in bed at midnight, letting the darkness wrap around you? Or maybe you're listening on your way home from work, wishing you had someone to talk to about the weight in your chest. Wherever you are, I want you to know this. Stories like mine are more than just words. They are mirrors. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find a piece of yourself in the shadows of my choices. Forgiveness. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? But what happens when forgiveness becomes the very reason you fall deeper into the pit? What happens when the person you forgave looks you in the eye, smiles gently, and hides a secret behind their teeth? That secret, the one that shattered everything, didn't come all at once. No, it crept in slowly, like water seeping under a locked door, quiet but unstoppable. At first, there were whispers, subtle signs, things I chose not to see because I was clinging to the version of my husband I wanted to believe in. But eventually, the truth clawed its way out, and it demanded to be seen. This is the story of how I forgave, and how that forgiveness became the biggest mistake of my life. The first time my husband made a mistake, it didn't come wrapped in fire and thunder. It came quietly, almost softly, like a whisper you try to ignore. I remember the moment so vividly, not because it was spectacular, but because it was ordinary. And that's what made it dangerous. He came home late one night, later than usual, with the faint smell of perfume clinging to his jacket. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone brushed past him in a crowded place. Maybe it was just the soap in the office restroom. You see, when you love someone, your mind rushes to build excuses faster than your heart can process the truth. And that night, I chose excuses. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, "I'm sorry I'm late. Work kept me longer than expected." His voice trembled ever so slightly, but I wanted to believe him. I nodded, smiled weakly, and tried to let it pass. That's what you do in marriage, right? You give the benefit of the doubt. You keep the peace. You forgive the small things, hoping they don't grow into bigger ones. But small things? They do grow. They multiply like cracks in a glass window, spreading until one day everything shatters with the faintest touch. A week later, I found a message on his phone. It wasn't long, just a handful of words, casual, friendly, but far too intimate to be from a coworker. My hands shook as I read it, my chest tightening like a fist was squeezing my lungs. He had lied. The late nights weren't about work. They were about someone else. I confronted him, my voice trembling with anger and disbelief. At first, he denied it. His face twisted with frustration, then softened into guilt. "It was a mistake," he said. "It didn't mean anything. Please, just forgive me." That word, forgive, it rolled off his tongue like a plea, like a key he knew would unlock the door back into my heart. And I, desperate to believe that we could still be whole, gave him that forgiveness. I told myself, everyone stumbles. People make poor choices in moments of weakness. If love is real, you don't abandon someone after one fall. You pick them up, you hold their hand tighter. You rebuild, at least that's what I thought. The days that followed were heavy with silence. He avoided my eyes, and I avoided my questions. But then came the flowers, the unexpected gifts, the gentle touches on my shoulder when I cooked dinner. He tried. I saw the effort in his smile, the hesitation in his words. He wanted me to believe he was sorry, and I wanted to believe it too. Forgiving him was both a relief and a prison. On one hand, I felt strong, like I had chosen compassion over anger. But on the other hand, a seed of doubt had been planted deep inside me. Every time he left the house, I wondered. Every time his phone buzzed, I flinched. Forgiveness, I learned, doesn't erase the past. It only teaches you to live with the ache of uncertainty. I remember sitting in bed one night, staring at the ceiling fan turning lazily above me. He was asleep beside me, his breathing slow and even. I whispered to myself, "This is the price of love. You forgive. You move on." But even as I said it, a part of me knew that forgiveness without truth is like patching a leaking roof with paper. It might hold for a while, but sooner or later, the rain will find its way in. That was his first mistake. Not just the betrayal itself, but the way it cracked the foundation of our marriage. Forgiving him was my choice, but it also became my burden. I carried it quietly, convincing myself it was worth it, that one day the trust would return. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. The man I thought I knew had shown me a shadow of himself, and once you've seen the shadow, you can never fully forget it. At the time, I thought it was just one bad chapter in a book that still had many pages left. I told myself we could rewrite our story together. What I didn't know was that this mistake was only the beginning, that behind the curtain of forgiveness, something far darker was already waiting. Forgiveness, they say, is the first step toward healing. And in those early weeks after his mistake, I clung to that belief like a lifeline. I told myself that if I could forgive, if I could let the past slip quietly into the shadows, then maybe we could find our way back to the warmth we once had. At first, there were small signs that seemed to support my choice. He started making breakfast on weekends again, scrambled eggs a little too runny, toast burned at the edges, but served with a smile that reminded me of the man I had married. He began coming home earlier, almost eager, as though proving to me that the late nights were truly over. And in the evenings, he would sit close beside me on the couch, his arm draped gently around my shoulders, as if trying to stitch back the closeness that had unraveled. For a moment, it felt like we were rebuilding something. The house was filled with quieter conversations, careful laughter, and gestures meant to show devotion. I wanted so badly to believe we were healing. I wanted to believe my forgiveness had worked, that it had pulled us out of the storm and back into calm waters. But calm waters can be deceiving. Beneath the surface, the current was still strong, pulling us into places neither of us wanted to admit existed. Every time he smiled, a voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Is it real?" Every time he touched my hand, I wondered, does he touch her hand the same way? Forgiveness had removed the anger, but it hadn't erased the doubt. And doubt is its own kind of prison. Quiet, invisible, but suffocating. Still, I tried. I cooked his favorite meals again, even lit candles at dinner like we used to in the early years of our marriage. I told myself that effort mattered, that if I poured enough love into the cracks, maybe the cracks would disappear. And for a little while, it almost seemed to work. We laughed together one evening while watching an old movie. He rested his head on my shoulder, and I felt a flicker of the tenderness that had drawn me to him years ago. It was a fragile moment, like holding a glass ornament in my hands, terrified it might slip and break. I wanted to freeze time, to pretend that this was enough. But rebuilding trust is not a straight road. It's a winding path, filled with shadows that creep in when you least expect them. One night, as I folded laundry, I caught a faint trace of unfamiliar perfume again on one of his shirts. My stomach dropped. He noticed my hesitation and quickly said, "Oh, someone at work hugged me today. Just a colleague. Don't read into it." I nodded. I forced a smile. But deep inside, the unease returned. Forgiveness had built us a fragile house, but the foundation was still cracked. Every little inconsistency made the walls tremble. The strange thing about trying to rebuild trust is that you start doubting yourself too. I questioned whether I was being paranoid, whether my wounds were coloring my vision. Maybe I was the problem, I thought. Maybe I was holding on to the past too tightly. And so, I silenced my doubts, burying them beneath the daily rituals of marriage. We went to dinners with friends. We smiled for photos. We played the part of a happy couple. On the outside, it looked as though we were stronger than ever. People even told us, "You two are such an example of love surviving hardship." I would smile and thank them, but inside, my heart whispered, "If only you knew." The effort to rebuild became exhausting. Forgiveness isn't a one-time decision. It's something you have to practice every day, again and again, every time doubt sneaks in. And with each day, I felt a little piece of myself slipping away, sacrificed to the hope that maybe, just maybe, love could be repaired. And yet, as much as I tried, there was always something missing in his eyes. A flicker of distance, a shadow I couldn't name. It was as if part of him was always somewhere else, carrying a secret I didn't yet have the courage to uncover. Looking back now, I realized that what I called rebuilding was really just patching holes in a sinking boat. We were afloat, yes, but barely. And while I clung desperately to hope, the truth was already beneath us, rising like water, ready to drown everything I thought I had saved. They say the smallest details are the ones that haunt you. The things so subtle, so ordinary, that you almost convince yourself they're nothing. But later, when the truth comes crashing down, you look back and realize those tiny details were warnings. For me, the signs began as whispers in the background of daily life. A misplaced receipt, a glance that lingered too long, a phone call answered in another room. Nothing obvious, nothing dramatic. Just shadows where there should have been light. One evening, I was setting the table for dinner when his phone buzzed. Normally, I wouldn't have noticed. Phones ring all the time. But instead of answering in front of me, he picked it up quickly, pressed it to his ear, and walked into the hallway. The door closed softly behind him. I stood there, fork in hand, listening to his muffled voice through the wall. I couldn't make out the words, only the tone. Low, urgent, a little too careful. When he came back, his smile was stretched too thin. "Just work," he said. "Just work." The phrase began to sound like a shield he kept raising, and I started to wonder what exactly he was defending. Then there were the receipts. Small slips of paper tucked into his wallet, expensive restaurants I'd never been to, gifts I'd never received. He shrugged them off with excuses, client dinners, obligations, surprises he hadn't had the chance to give me yet. And I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe so badly that I almost convinced myself those stories were true. Almost. Another night, as I climbed into bed, I noticed a faint lipstick stain on his collar. My chest tightened, but when I asked, he laughed it off. The woman at the office leaned in too close when she was thanking me for a project. He even turned it into a joke, brushing it away like it was silly to think otherwise. I forced a laugh, too, because sometimes it's easier to play along with a lie than to confront the truth head-on. But the most unsettling signs weren't physical. They were emotional. I began to feel the distance between us grow, inch by inch, like a rope fraying slowly under tension. He was present, but absent at the same time, sitting across from me at dinner, nodding at my words, but his eyes were somewhere else. When I reached for his hand, sometimes he squeezed it back. Other times, his fingers were limp, distracted, as though even that small gesture required too much effort. I told myself I was overthinking. After all, I had already forgiven him once. I had made the choice to rebuild, to move forward. If I questioned every shadow, every whisper, then what was the point of forgiveness at all? But doubt doesn't care about promises. It seeps in quietly, poisoning even the sweetest moments. Like the time we went to the park on a Sunday afternoon. Families were scattered on the grass, children chasing bubbles in the sunlight. For a brief moment, I felt content, sitting beside him, watching the world spin without worry. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at it, quickly turned it face down, and his body stiffened. When I asked who it was, he smiled too quickly. "Nobody important." Nobody important. The words lodged in my throat like a thorn. That night, I lay awake listening to his breathing. It was steady, calm, almost peaceful. But I couldn't stop hearing the echo of those words. Nobody important. Because if it truly was nobody, why hide it? I started noticing more. The way he dressed sharper on certain days. The way his mood lifted when mysterious messages came through. The way he avoided eye contact when I asked simple questions. Each sign on its own was harmless, but together they painted a picture I didn't want to see. And yet, I stayed silent, because silence felt safer than confrontation. Because I was still clinging to the idea that forgiveness had meant something, that it wasn't wasted. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe it was work. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just scarred from the first mistake, unable to see clearly anymore. But the truth? The truth was already dripping into our lives, one subtle sign at a time. And deep down, I knew that no amount of forgiveness could cover what was coming. Sometimes, it takes someone outside the circle to notice the cracks you're too close to see. And for me, that someone was my best friend, Clara. Clara had known me since college. She was the kind of friend who could read my mood before I even spoke, who knew when my laughter was genuine and when it was just a mask. One afternoon, she invited me to meet her at our favorite little cafe, the one tucked away on a quiet street corner, with mismatched chairs and the smell of cinnamon in the air. The moment I sat down across from her, she tilted her head, studying me the way she always did. "You look tired," she said softly, not as an insult, but as a concern. I forced a smile, stirring my tea even though I wasn't planning to drink it. "I'm fine," I lied. But Clara wasn't one to let things slide. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Is everything okay between you and him?" My chest tightened. The question was simple, but it carried weight. I wanted to say yes, to laugh it off, to assure her that forgiveness had healed everything. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I said, "We're working on it." Clara didn't look convinced. She tapped her fingers against her cup, then sighed. "Listen, I saw him the other night. He wasn't alone." Her words hit me like a wave crashing over a fragile sandcastle. My stomach flipped, my hands froze mid-stir. "What do you mean?" I whispered. She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "I was at the new Italian place downtown, the one with the red awning. He was there, with a woman. They looked close." My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to scream that she was wrong, that she must have mistaken him for someone else. But deep down, I knew she hadn't. The pieces were already there. The phone calls, the late nights, the perfume, the lies. Her words only forced them into focus. I shook my head, trying to hold on to denial. "Maybe it was a client dinner. You know how his work is." Clara reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. "I know what I saw, and I don't want to hurt you, but you need to be careful. I don't think this is over." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I blinked them back. The cafe around us seemed to blur. The clinking of cups, the chatter of other patrons. None of it felt real. Only her words echoed in my mind. "You need to be careful." That night, I confronted him. Not directly, not with accusations. I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I asked about his evening the night Clara saw him. He smiled casually and said he'd been at a business meeting. His eyes didn't waver, his tone didn't falter. He was calm, too calm, and for a moment, I almost believed him. But Clara's warning lingered. Her voice followed me through every silence in the house, every glance he avoided. I started noticing things with sharper eyes. The way he locked his phone the second he put it down. The way he smiled when he read certain messages. The way his mood lifted when I wasn't looking directly at him. The hardest part wasn't the suspicion. It was the loneliness. I couldn't talk to him about it without sounding paranoid, and I couldn't tell Clara more without feeling like I was betraying him. Forgiveness had trapped me in a cage where I couldn't move without breaking something. And yet, deep down, I knew she was right. The signs were there. The warning was clear. But I wasn't ready to face it, not yet. So I smiled through dinners, laughed at his jokes, and pretended that the storm wasn't brewing just beyond my doorstep. Clara's words were the first real crack in the fragile world I had built after forgiveness. They planted a seed of fear that no amount of denial could erase. And as much as I tried to silence it, the truth was becoming harder to ignore. Because sometimes, it's not the enemy outside that breaks you. It's the enemy lying right beside you in bed. It happened on an ordinary Saturday morning, the kind where sunlight streamed through the windows in golden lines, and the quiet of the house felt deceptively safe. I was tidying up, humming absent-mindedly, when I noticed his desk. The top drawer was always a little messy, filled with receipts, pens that didn't work, and loose change. I had opened it dozens of times without a thought. But that day, something new caught my eye. The bottom drawer, one I had never paid much attention to, was locked. At first, I didn't think much of it. People lock drawers all the time. Maybe it was for important documents, tax papers, things he didn't want misplaced. But the longer I stared at that drawer, the more questions gnawed at me. Why had I never noticed the lock before? And why did the very sight of it make my chest tighten? I bent down, brushing my fingers across the cool metal handle. The keyhole glinted faintly in the light. For a long moment, I just knelt there, torn between curiosity and fear. Because I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever was inside wasn't meant for me to see. That night, I tried to push it from my mind. We ate dinner together, laughed at a silly show on television, and went to bed like nothing was wrong. But when the house grew quiet and his breathing slowed into sleep, my thoughts kept circling back to that drawer. Locked, hidden, guarded. Over the next few days, I noticed how protective he was of that desk. If I walked near it, he'd casually shift closer. If I reached for something on top, his eyes followed my hand with subtle sharpness. It was as though he was silently daring me to touch what didn't belong to me, and that only made me want to know more. One afternoon, when he was out running errands, I stood before the drawer again. My heart pounded, my palms damp. I searched the room for a key, checking under papers, behind books, even beneath the desk itself. Nothing. He had hidden it well. I remember whispering to myself, "Why would he hide something from me?" The question hung in the air like a ghost, wrapping around me with cold fingers. Because if it was innocent, if it was truly just paperwork or old photos, why the secrecy? I pressed my ear against the drawer, as though I could listen for its secrets. Ridiculous, I know. But in that silence, I imagined it holding everything I feared. Love letters, photographs, evidence of a life I wasn't part of. The thought made me feel both sick and furious. That night, I tried again. When he fell asleep, I tiptoed back into the study, flashlight in hand. My fingers traced the lock, trembling. For a moment, I considered prying it open with a tool, but then I froze. Because the truth terrified me more than the unknown. I blew out a shaky breath and whispered, "Not tonight." I couldn't do it. I wasn't ready. The next morning, I watched him as he sat at that desk. He unlocked the drawer quickly, slipping something inside before locking it again. He thought I hadn't noticed, but I did. And in that instant, my doubts turned into certainty. There was something in that drawer that he never wanted me to see. The knowledge burned inside me like a secret I didn't ask for. Every time I passed that study, I felt its weight pressing against me, louder and louder, until it became impossible to ignore. Clara's warning echoed in my ears. The late nights, the perfume, the phone calls. And now, this drawer. Each piece added to a puzzle I didn't want to solve. But one day, I knew I would have to. Because the truth always demands to be found, no matter how tightly you lock it away. If the locked drawer was the shadow in the room, then his lies were the whispers that followed me everywhere. Small, slippery things at first, barely noticeable, easy to dismiss. But they multiplied so quickly that soon I felt surrounded by them. It began with simple stories. He'd tell me he was going to the office late, but when I called, the receptionist said he had left hours earlier. He'd say he was meeting an old colleague, but when I asked for a name, he stumbled, fumbling with his words like a child caught in mischief. Each time, he had an explanation ready, too ready. The words came smooth, practiced, like he had rehearsed them in his head. And maybe he had. I remember one evening in particular. He told me he'd be home by 8. I cooked dinner, lit candles, tried to set the stage for a normal night. 8 o'clock passed, then 9. At 10, he finally walked in, smelling faintly of wine and smoke. "Traffic," he said casually, kissing my cheek as though nothing was wrong. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to erase the doubt. But when I glanced at his phone lying carelessly on the counter, the screen lit up with a message. "Hope you got home safe? Last night was perfect. My stomach twisted. I felt the world tilt beneath me. He noticed my eyes on the phone and quickly snatched it up, shoving it into his pocket. "Just a colleague joking around," he muttered. The lie was so obvious, so flimsy, yet he said it with such conviction that for a second, I wondered if I was the one imagining things. That was the cruelty of it. Each lie made me doubt not just him, but myself. Was I paranoid? Was I reading too much into every detail? Or was I finally seeing the truth I'd been too afraid to face? The lies grew bolder. Receipts appeared in his pockets from places we'd never been together. I found hotel keycards tucked into his coat. Once, he claimed he had gone for a morning jog, but when he came back, his hair was styled, his shirt freshly pressed, and his shoes barely dusty. Jogging had never looked so polished. When I asked questions, he deflected with charm. "You worry too much. You're imagining things. Don't let your insecurities ruin us." Each response was designed to push the blame back onto me, to make me question my sanity. And the terrifying part was, it worked. I began second-guessing everything. If he said he was busy, I forced myself to nod and smile, even when my chest screamed otherwise. If he laughed at a joke I didn't hear, I told myself it was nothing. Forgiveness had turned me into a prisoner of silence, and his lies were the bars around me. One night, Clara called again. "He's lying to you," she said bluntly. "I don't want to hurt you, but I've seen enough. You need to protect yourself." I wanted to scream at her, to beg her to stop talking, because hearing the truth from someone else made it too real. But deep down, I knew she was right. And still, I stayed. I stayed because I remembered the way he held me when I was sick. The way he whispered dreams into my ear years ago. The way he once looked at me like I was his whole world. I stayed because leaving meant admitting that forgiveness hadn't fixed anything. That maybe I had wasted all that effort, all that hope, on someone who had never deserved it. But the lies? They never stopped. They tangled themselves into every corner of our lives. Little ones, big ones, some that didn't even make sense. Lies about where he had been, about who he was with, about why he couldn't answer his phone. Lies layered on top of lies, until I couldn't tell where the truth ended and the performance began. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, his even breathing beside me. I'd whisper to myself, "He's lying." Saying it out loud made it real, but the next morning, when he smiled at me and kissed my cheek, I buried the words again. Because sometimes, it's easier to drown in lies than to face the storm of truth waiting outside. And yet, I knew the storm was coming. Every small lie was a drop of water, and sooner or later, the flood would break through the walls I had built. The truth has a strange way of showing up when you least expect it. Sometimes it hides in shadows, forcing you to search for it. And other times, it walks straight into your path, daring you to deny it. For me, the truth arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, in the form of a stranger I had never met before. I was at the grocery store, umbrella dripping in my hand, when I heard someone call my husband's name. At first, I thought I misheard. But then I turned, and there she was. A woman, mid-30s, elegant, her eyes widening with recognition. "You must be his wife," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My heart skipped. "Yes," I answered cautiously. "I'm his wife." The woman tilted her head, as though studying me, deciding how much to reveal. Then she gave a soft laugh. "He talks about you sometimes. I didn't think I'd ever get the chance to meet you." I froze, her words echoing inside my head. "He talks about you sometimes. Not often, not proudly, just sometimes." And the way she said it wasn't admiration. It was pity. I tried to play it cool, but my voice betrayed me. "And you are?" "Oh, just a friend," she said smoothly. Too smoothly. Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't name. Guilt, maybe, or satisfaction. She adjusted her purse on her shoulder and added, "We've spent a lot of late nights working together. He's such a dedicated man." Late nights. The phrase sliced through me like a blade. All the excuses, all the absences. It fit too neatly into place. My fingers tightened on the handle of my basket, my breath shallow. I managed a stiff smile. "Yes, he's very dedicated." She gave me a look then, a look that said she knew something I didn't, something I wasn't supposed to. And with a polite nod, she walked away, leaving me rooted to the floor, my world spinning around me. The drive home was a blur. The rain streaked across my windshield like tears I refused to shed. My mind replayed every word, every glance, every subtle sign. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was confirmation. Maybe not a full confession, but enough to break the fragile thread of trust I had been clinging to. When he came home that evening, I watched him closely. He kissed my cheek, asked about my day, acted as though everything was normal. But I couldn't unsee her smile, couldn't unhear her words. "We've spent a lot of late nights together." So I asked, casual, as though I were making conversation, "Do you know a woman named—" I gave her name, watching carefully for his reaction. He froze, just for a second. It was small, almost imperceptible, but I caught it. His eyes flickered, his jaw tightened, then he forced a laugh. "Of course, she's just a colleague. Why?" "Just a colleague." The words rang hollow. "She mentioned you spend a lot of late nights working together," I said softly, my eyes fixed on him. He smiled too quickly, brushing it off. "You know how people exaggerate. Don't let it bother you." But it did bother me. It hollowed me out from the inside. Because I knew, when people exaggerate, it's usually in the other direction. She wasn't bragging. She wasn't jealous. She was warning me, whether she meant to or not. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop hearing her voice. Couldn't stop seeing that flicker in his eyes. The lies had multiplied, yes, but now the world around us was confirming them. Strangers were stepping into my story, pointing at the cracks I had tried so hard to cover. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because secrets don't stay quiet forever. They find their way to the surface, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in storms. And the storm was coming for me. Secrets have a way of revealing themselves, even when people try to bury them. And when they finally come out, they don't whisper, they roar. For me, the roar came one night when the house was too quiet, and I decided I couldn't live with unanswered questions any longer. He had gone to bed early, claiming exhaustion from another long day at work. But his phone buzzed on the nightstand, glowing in the dark. I stared at it, my heart hammering. I knew I shouldn't. I knew trust wasn't built by snooping, but trust was already gone, wasn't it? All that was left was desperation. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, sliding it open. The screen unlocked easily. He had grown careless, too confident in my silence. And there it was. Message after message, threaded like a dagger pressed into my chest. Words too intimate to belong to a colleague. Promises too tender to be professional. "I miss you already. Last night felt like a dream." She suspects nothing. She, that single word sliced me open. I read it again and again, the letters blurring through my tears. He wasn't just lying. He was living two lives, and I was the fool holding on to scraps of forgiveness while he built a new world behind my back. I set the phone down, my hands shaking so violently I thought I might drop it. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room spun, the air thick with betrayal. He slept peacefully beside me, oblivious to the storm raging just inches away. I wanted to scream, to shake him awake, to throw the truth in his face. But instead, I sat there in silence, clutching my knees to my chest, listening to the sound of my world collapsing. The next morning, I couldn't look at him the same way. Every word he spoke sounded like poison. Every smile felt like a knife. When he kissed my cheek before leaving for work, I flinched, pretending it was nothing. But inside, something inside me had cracked open, and there was no sealing it shut. For days, I wrestled with myself. Should I confront him? Should I walk away? The weight of the secret pressed against me, heavier with each passing hour. My reflection in the mirror looked older, wearier. It wasn't just my marriage breaking, it was me. Then, one evening, I decided I would confront him. I would drag the truth into the light, no matter how much it hurt. He walked through the door, loosened his tie, dropped his briefcase on the table. I stood there in the living room, phone in hand, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. "I saw your messages," I said, my voice low but steady. The room froze. His head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. For a heartbeat, he looked startled. Then, almost instantly, he recovered, slipping into that practiced calm I knew too well. "You're overreacting," he said smoothly. "They don't mean anything, just harmless talk." Harmless talk. The phrase was so absurd, so insulting, that I almost laughed. But the sound that escaped me wasn't laughter. It was something broken, something bitter. "I forgave you once," I whispered. "I gave you everything I had left, and you threw it away." His mask cracked then, just slightly. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "What do you want me to say? That I made a mistake? Fine. But you always make things bigger than they are." The blame. Always, somehow it came back to me. My doubts, my insecurities, my fault. I stared at him, the man I had loved, the man I had trusted, and realized the truth wasn't just in the messages. The real truth was standing right in front of me. He didn't care. Not really. His mistake wasn't a slip. It was a choice. A choice he was still making. And in that moment, I knew forgiveness had ended. Whatever thread had bound us together had finally snapped. The secret had unfolded, tearing through the fragile fabric of our marriage. And what it left behind was nothing but ruins. Forgiveness is supposed to heal, isn't it? That's what everyone says. Forgive and forget, and you'll find peace. But standing in the wreckage of my marriage, I realized forgiveness doesn't always heal. It sometimes destroys. Because when you forgive someone who never truly regrets, all you're doing is handing them another weapon to use against you. After I confronted him, our house turned cold. It wasn't the silence that scared me, it was the indifference. He didn't chase me to explain, didn't try to hold me while I cried. He just moved on, as though my pain was an inconvenience he didn't have time for. I would sit at the kitchen table in the mornings, staring into my coffee, while he scrolled through his phone. Once, he had tried to charm me with smiles and apologies. Now, he didn't even bother. He had tested the limits of my forgiveness before, and now he knew there were none. At least, that's what he thought. But inside me, something was shifting. The forgiveness I had once given so freely now felt like a heavy chain around my neck. I had believed in him, trusted him, rebuilt with him. And for what? For another lie? Another betrayal? Another wound that cut deeper than the last? The hurt wasn't just about what he had done. It was about what it revealed. That my forgiveness had never mattered. To him, it was just a get-out-of-jail-free card, a safety net he could fall back on while he continued spinning his lies. He hadn't valued it. He hadn't valued me. I began replaying our years together, seeing them through a different lens. The laughter, the whispered promises, the late-night talks, they all felt tainted now. How many of those moments were real, and how many were just another layer of his performance? One night, I broke down. Alone in the bedroom, I pressed my face into the pillow and sobbed until my throat ached. I wasn't just crying for the betrayal. I was crying for the woman I used to be. The woman who believed in love, in trust, in the power of forgiveness. She was gone now, replaced by someone harder, someone who had learned the cruelest truth. Some wounds don't heal, they only scar. And yet, even in my heartbreak, I found myself doing something strange. I watched him, carefully, closely. I studied his movements, his expressions, the way his eyes shifted when he spoke. It was like living with a stranger I had to learn all over again, except this stranger carried the face of the man I once loved. One evening, I asked him why. My voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Why did you do it again? Why hurt me like this?" He didn't even look up from his phone. "Because I could." Those 3 words cut deeper than anything else he had ever said. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He had betrayed me again because he knew I would forgive. He had no fear of consequences, no fear of losing me. In his mind, I was already conquered. That was the moment forgiveness shattered completely. Whatever fragile hope I had been clinging to disintegrated, leaving only sharp edges behind. I realized I could never look at him the same way again. The man I had forgiven no longer existed. He had been replaced by someone colder, someone unrecognizable, someone who saw my compassion as weakness. The next morning, when I looked at him across the breakfast table, I felt nothing. No anger, no sorrow, just emptiness. And sometimes, emptiness is more terrifying than rage, because rage means you still care. Emptiness means you've stopped. But emptiness doesn't last forever. It makes room for something else, something darker. And in that hollow space inside me, a new question began to rise. What else was he hiding? I thought betrayal couldn't cut any deeper. I thought I had already reached the bottom of this pit. But the universe has a cruel way of showing you that there's always further to fall. It began with an envelope. Thick, cream-colored, tucked carelessly into the side pocket of his briefcase. I found it one evening while picking up his things from the living room floor. I hadn't been searching for anything, but when the flap slipped open and a stack of photographs spilled into my hands, my heart stopped. The pictures weren't of us. They weren't even of him alone. They were of a little boy. Dark hair, familiar eyes, a gap-toothed smile, a boy who couldn't have been more than 5. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the images, flipping through them with trembling fingers. The boy was laughing in one, playing with blocks in another, sleeping peacefully in someone's arms. And in more than one photo, those arms belonged to my husband. I sank into the couch, clutching the photographs as if they were burning my skin. My mind raced, refusing to believe what my eyes were seeing. A child. His child. A secret life hidden behind my back. That night, I waited for him to come home. The hours crawled by, each tick of the clock hammering in my chest. When he finally walked through the door, whistling as though nothing in the world was wrong, I felt my whole body tense. I held up the photographs. My voice cracked. "Who is this?" The whistling stopped. His eyes darted to the pictures, then back to me. For a moment, he looked almost human, guilty, afraid. But then, just as quickly, his mask returned. "It's nothing," he said flatly. "Don't make it into something it's not." Don't make it into something? My voice rose, trembling with disbelief. This is a child you never told me about. Are you going to stand there and tell me it's nothing? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. You wouldn't understand. That phrase, you wouldn't understand, felt like gasoline on a fire. My hands shook, the photographs fluttering like wounded birds. Then make me understand, I demanded. Who is he? And then, the words I never thought I'd hear. He's my son. The world tilted, my knees buckled, and I gripped the arm of the couch to steady myself. His son. A child he had hidden from me. A child that meant every moment of our marriage, every promise, every dream of building a family together, had been a lie. How long? I whispered. Since before us, he said casually, as if that excused everything. It was complicated. I didn't think you needed to know. Didn't think I needed to know. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the walls down with the fury boiling in my chest. But all I could do was sink into silence, my breath shallow, my body trembling. A child. Flesh and blood. A living reminder of everything he had hidden, everything he had betrayed. And worst of all, he had looked me in the eyes, night after night, and spoken of our future as though it were whole, while another life existed just out of reach. In that moment, forgiveness wasn't just shattered, it was obliterated. Because betrayal between two adults is one thing, but when it involves a child, when it involves an entire life built on deception, it becomes something else entirely. Something unforgivable. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replayed the images of that little boy, his innocent smile, his trusting eyes. None of this was his fault, yet he was part of the lie that had destroyed me. And somewhere in the darkness, a new terror took hold. If he could hide a child from me, what else was he capable of hiding? Once you see one lie clearly, the others start to glow like embers in the dark. That's what happened to me after discovering the child. Suddenly, everything I thought I knew about my husband felt like smoke in my hands, intangible, suffocating, impossible to hold on to. I began pulling at the threads, quietly, carefully, and what I found was not just one betrayal, but a web, intricate, deliberate, spun so tightly that I wondered how long I had been trapped without even realizing it. It started with the finances. I had always trusted him to handle our accounts. He was good with numbers, disciplined with bills. But when I finally logged in to check for myself, what I saw made my stomach churn. Money missing, withdrawals I hadn't authorized, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. He hadn't just been lying about his whereabouts. He had been siphoning pieces of our life away, one transaction at a time. Then came the family. I spoke to his sister one afternoon, hoping for some clarity. Instead, her hesitant expression told me more than her words ever could. I thought you knew, she said quietly, biting her lip. I thought he had told you about everything. Everything. The word was a stone dropping into my chest. She knew about the child. She knew about the other life he had kept from me. And she had stayed silent, bound by his manipulation, his careful control of the story. Even Clara, my loyal friend, revealed how far his deceit stretched. One evening, she admitted he had once cornered her at a party, asking her not to interfere in our marriage, warning her that her words might make things worse for me. He had twisted her concern into something dangerous, trying to isolate me even further. And I realized that was the true cruelty of his lies. It wasn't just about cheating. It wasn't just about another woman or even another child. It was about control. He had woven a web so wide that every person around me was caught in it, silenced by fear, guilt, or misplaced loyalty. Looking back, I saw it all more clearly. The way he dismissed my doubts, calling me paranoid. The way he shifted blame onto me whenever I asked questions. There comes a point when silence is no longer survival. It's surrender. And I realized I had been surrendering for far too long. After discovering the child, the money, the endless lies, I couldn't keep patching the cracks. The house of forgiveness had already collapsed. All that remained was rubble, and I had to decide whether to be buried beneath it or claw my way out. The confrontation happened on a night heavy with tension, the air thick as though even the walls knew what was coming. He walked through the door, loosened his tie, and dropped his briefcase like always. To anyone else, it might have looked like an ordinary evening, but to me, it felt like the calm before a storm that would finally tear us apart. I was waiting for him in the living room, the photographs of the child spread across the coffee table, the bank statements stacked neatly beside them. Evidence of a life I hadn't agreed to live. Evidence of the lies that had stolen mine. He glanced at the table, then at me, and smirked. Not nervous, not ashamed, just annoyed, as if I were inconveniencing him. "So, this is what we're doing now?" he asked casually, shrugging off his jacket. My voice shook, but I didn't back down. "We're doing the truth. Finally." He dropped into a chair, slouched like a king surveying his throne. "You don't really want the truth," he said. "You want the story that makes you the victim? But the truth? The truth is, you've always been weak. Easy to forgive, easy to fool, and I knew you'd never leave." The words hit me like stones, each one heavier than the last. Weak, easy, never leave. He had known all along that my forgiveness was his weapon. He had counted on it, relied on it, built his empire of lies on the back of my trust. My hands trembled as I pointed to the photographs. "And what about him? That boy, your son. How could you hide him from me?" For the first time, his smirk faltered. A flicker of something crossed his face. Guilt, maybe, or fear. But it was gone in a heartbeat. "That's none of your concern," he snapped. "He's mine, my responsibility. You wouldn't understand." The fury that surged inside me was unlike anything I had ever felt. "Not my concern," I shouted, my voice breaking. "You married me. You promised me a life, a family. You stole years from me while you built another life behind my back. How dare you tell me it's not my concern?" He stood then, his shadow looming over me. For a moment, I thought he might try to soften, to backtrack. But instead, his face hardened into something I barely recognized. Cold, detached, cruel. "You should have stayed quiet," he said softly, almost like a threat. "Things were easier when you didn't ask questions." That was the collapse, not just of our marriage, but of the illusion I had been living in. Because in that moment, I saw him for who he truly was. Not a man who had made mistakes. Not a man struggling with guilt. But a man who had chosen deception as his way of life. And the worst part? He didn't even care that I knew. The confrontation ended not with screaming, not with tears, but with silence. I turned away from him, the photographs and papers still scattered between us. He picked up his jacket, muttered something about staying at the office, and walked out the door without a second glance. The collapse wasn't dramatic, it was eerily calm. And sometimes, that's the most terrifying kind of ending. Because when someone can walk away from the ruins they created without a shred of remorse, you realize the battle was lost long before you even began. I sat alone in that living room, surrounded by evidence of betrayal. My body shaking, my heart heavy. The confrontation had given me no closure, no apology, no redemption. Only the confirmation that evil doesn't always shout. It often smiles, shrugs, and leaves you bleeding in silence.